like I've totally changed my view on that, because I just don't find it useful to be on social media at all. Like, in for anything that you want to do, for anything that you're gaining from social media, there are far better ways to do those things.
Hey everybody, what's good? Welcome back to the Next Move podcast. And if this is your first time on the show, we're a podcast that shares the strategies, stories, and tools behind people who are making an impact in their field. And today I have Mihir Dalal with me, who's the author of The Big Billion Startup, which is a book that takes you into behind the scenes of India's most successful startup, Flipkart. And it really makes you feel like you're there. When I was reading it, he takes you through the brilliance of the founders, the intelligence, but also the egos and the rivalries and all that comes with a fast-growing startup. And it's really an incredible read. But today we're not going to go into the book per se, but we're more going to go into the process of writing a book. How do you write a book, and what goes into it? For any aspiring authors, what are some things that Mihir wishes he could have done a little bit better? What are some things that people can do to streamline their writing processes? We're going to get into that. And we're also going to get into, since he was so close to the Flipkart story and was such an insider in the story with the way he reported, we're going to get into what has he learned about entrepreneurship from the experience, from basically the most successful ever Indian startup. So before we do, Mihir, I'm so happy to have you on. How are you?
Thanks, Arman. It's great to be here.
Amazing. So let's get straight into it. I want to ask you, what compelled you to write this book? Why did you choose to write this book on Flipkart?
For a variety of reasons. I work for Mint, which is India's second largest financial newspaper. So I took up this book project around August of 2018, and for about four and a half years leading up to that period, I had been writing on Flipkart and covering startups for Mint. And Flipkart was really at the center of my coverage, because really it was India's too big to fail startup. So I'd been writing on the company, and the story was just so fascinating and was so compelling that I really felt that once the sale to Walmart had been finalized, it needed to be told in full.
So I imagine when Flipkart's acquisition got finalized, there's probably a lot of people that wanted to write this book, but from what I've read and researched, you seem to be the first, and it's so detailed. So can you talk about how you became the first person to write this book, and why did you choose to do it so fast?
Yeah. Just to give you some context, there was immense interest in Flipkart, not only after the sale to Walmart, but even as early as 2015. So I had first been approached by a leading publisher for a book on startups in 2015, and at that time I had pitched a book on Flipkart, but for a variety of reasons that conversation didn't go anywhere. So even at that time, there was so much interest in Flipkart, and you're right, especially after the sale to Walmart. There were four people that I know of personally who were thinking of doing a book on Flipkart. Because again, India has just never seen such a stunning success story before, in terms of the magnitude of the sale, in terms of the speed at which the company was built, the impact that it had on the idea of entrepreneurship, everything, so it is just such a compelling story. So it's no surprise that so many people were interested in a book on Flipkart. The reason I was able to get ahead is, there are 2-3 reasons. One is that I had been covering Flipkart regularly for 4.5 years before I took up the book project. So that obviously played a big part in, giving me the confidence that if I take up a book project, I would be able to finish it and do justice to it. The other reason was that, from December of 2018, I was working on the book full time. So it took about a year to finish the book. So I I started in August of 2018, and the book was finally over in August of 2019. But from December of 2018 to August of 2019, I was just working on the book full time. So that requires a leap of faith, because I mean, most organizations will not be very generous in terms of giving you the time and the kind of space to take to do a book, and especially when it's when it's not just a few months, it's almost a year. So that was another big reason that I was able to just commit myself fully to the book. And I think the third was that uh, it just moved very quickly. I mean, in the sense that I was very quick to move. Once the sale to Walmart was finalized, sale was finalized in May of 2018. By August of 2018, which was 3-4 months later, I had decided that I am going to do the book. So yeah, so it's a combination of these reasons.
Did you feel any pressure in running the book? Because I want to go into your second point where you said you committed to it early. You had been covering for Flipkart for about 4 years, like you said, so you knew a lot about the company, but it feels like an immense pressure to tell this story in particular because it is so unique and there's so many stakeholders involved. And at times you have to go into the tough parts of the story. You have to go into the tough parts of the founders that probably they don't want people to know about, but you got access to through interviews, which we'll get into later. So, did you feel pressure, one, because you're writing such an incredible moment in Indian history, and two, because you left your job to do this for a year?
Yeah, so yeah, certainly I did feel pressure because, like you said, this is a fairly controversial book. There are many things that I've written about that many people in the book, would not like to have come out in public. So certainly there was pressure, but this, although this was pressure at a much, much higher level and at a kind of a far more intense degree, this is similar to the pressure that you face as a journalist when you're writing about controversial things. So I think that obviously prepared me. But yeah, certainly this was of a more intense degree and of a higher level. But again, it's just your job as a journalist prepares you to do this. In terms of having left my job, so I didn't exactly leave my job, but what I had to do was, because I had committed to the book full time, I did not want to spend more than a few hours every day on my regular job. So I actually moved to a new role at Mint. So yeah, that was a risk, and the pressure was also there from that side. But once I got into the book, it was just, I would say by December or by January of 2019, I was just really, really hooked, because the material that I was gathering was just so compelling, was just so new, and was just so interesting that I just did not think of anything else for the next 6 to 9 months. So yeah, so certainly the pressure was there, but I think the material was just so captivating that I did not think of anything else for the most part.
Nice. And dude, when I think about writing a book, especially one like this, where it involves so much reporting, so much research, so much, I mean, you have to write on top of doing your research late into the night or whatever it involves, you have to write it out and you have to write it out in a compelling way that's a story. So when you were looking at this behemoth of a task and you were saying, I have to get this done in 1 year, how did you plan for that? Because it's such a huge task. And if you could get into, also how you started to research to make sure you had the information for the book.
Um, so in terms of how do you approach such a massive task? I mean, you're right. It is extremely daunting, especially at the start, because you just cannot see how you're ever going to be able to finish the book. At least for the first few weeks. So I just realized that it's just totally pointless to think about the end. So I just went after the first, I would say, first couple of months, I just did not think about the end. I just took it one day at a time. And again, by December or so, by December or Jan, I had a pretty good idea of how the book was shaping up. So at that time, it became necessary to plan the writing part, because from August to December, I had only been reporting. I had not done much writing. Um, but once I had a fairly good idea of the material that I was gathering, yeah, it did become necessary to sit down and say that, okay, this is what I'm going to do. So I set myself certain goals, but inevitably I would, not meet those goals. And that again was completely fine, because I just felt that the material was just so interesting that it would make no sense to rush it in any way. So once I started writing in late December, early Jan, I just set myself daily word targets. And I did not fret too much, if I didn't meet them. So yeah, so that's how I went about, thinking of the task. I think it helps if you just, I mean, I know it sounds cliched, but I think if you just focus on the first, like especially in the first phase of your writing or reporting, I mean, depending on what kind of book you're doing, in the first phase, if you just focus on the book, on the material, then I think at least in my experience, things fall into place on their own, because um, inevitably you will have so many hiccups, so many problems, so many obstacles, so many doubts, that it will really, like, you will be dysfunctional if you try to hold yourself to a very inflexible timetable, or if you just think too much about, oh, how am I going to finish the book, etc., etc. So I would just say that, yeah, it helped me a lot to just focus on the material, and then worry about the timetable later. I just told myself that I'm going to worry about the timetable later, forget about it now.
So you didn't have an end date in mind when you started writing the book. It was just completely open.
I did. So when I started working on the book, the end date was that I had in mind was sometime around. So I started in August of 2018. I felt that I would be able to finish the book by, say, anywhere between March of 2019, or between March and May of 2019. That didn't happen. I ended up finishing my first draft only by June. But again, like I said, it just doesn't matter so much, because uh, as long as your book is really, really good, as long as you are confident that you're presenting it in a very compelling way, it just, I mean, a few months here and there makes no difference.
Right. And I want to get into a little bit of what you said earlier, and I want to put a pin in it for now, where you said, I had these challenges and lots of things came up. I want to get into the challenges later, but for now, I want to talk to you about you have to gather this immense amount of information. You have to talk to a ton of people to get the information that you need. How do you go about structuring that? Because you have a base level of knowledge. And did you say, okay, I need to know more about this, so I'll talk to this person? Or how did you get the information and through the interviews that you needed?
Sure. So for the first, say, 4 to 6 months, I did not worry about, I did not worry too much about if I was gathering the relevant information, or if I was gathering extra information, etc., etc. I just set myself, I mean, I had a very rough idea of what I wanted to do in mind in the first 6 months. So I just went out and did as much reporting as possible that was relevant to, like, that was vaguely relevant to what I had in mind. Um, then I took stock about 6 months later, 6 months into the book project, 4 to 6 months into the book project. And that is where um, I started having a clearer outline of the book, of how the narrative would shape up, of how, uh, how I should structure the book. So after the first to 6 months is when I started properly kind of, planning, not planning, but properly structuring the information and the material that I had into, like, say, chapters, into like what would comprise each chapter, etc., etc. So for me, it was that you just gather enough material so that you can then make sense of, like, the narrative of what you're writing about. So if you have, say, 3 or 4 organizing ideas uh, about the book, um, then you know will kind of be drawn towards those ideas. But those ideas cannot be predetermined. They have to be kind of, either, even if they are predetermined, they have to be backed up by evidence, by data, by material, etc., etc. I did not have too many determined ideas about what I was going to write. So I just went about reporting as much as possible in the first 4 to 6 months. And then I sat down, I made sense of what I had gathered till then, and then I structured the book. And after that, when I, was doing more interviews, that is when I would say know more about what exactly I wanted to ask. So yeah, that is roughly the process.
You're saying that you didn't want to have any predetermined views because that would bias the way you write, correct?
That would not just bias, that would not just bias the way I write, but it would also not be fair to the subject at hand. Because I mean, while I was reporting on Flipkart for 4.5 years, Flipkart had started out in 2007. So between 2007 and 2014, I had very little idea about what had gone on. So it would have been very stupid of me to say that, oh, I know everything and this is how I'm going to write. So what I did instead was that I told myself that, okay, I think I know some things about the period from 2014 to 2018, which is when I had been reporting on Flipkart, but I have no idea about what came before, which means that I cannot have my views about that period colored by the period that I had been reporting on. So I just decided to start from scratch. And then I went in a linear manner that, okay, so rather than looking at 2007 to 2014 from, in hindsight, from say 2014 to 2018, I decided to go from the start. I decided to start from 2007 and then see how things kind of progress, rather than, starting from 2018 and saying that, oh, this happened, so this must have happened before that.
Right. And that's incredibly interesting. And it makes complete sense. It's kind of taking away what you already know so that you can come at it with a fresh view. And I want to ask you, when it came to doing the interviews, were there people who were like, no, I don't want to do this because I'm either, I have a relationship with the founders or I just don't want to tell the stories. How did you kind of get around those challenges if they came up?
Yep. So they definitely did come up. I mean, several people that I reached out to, said they said that they would not talk about certain things, or they refused to talk outright. And that, honestly, it was completely expected. In fact, what I was surprised by was that how many people were actually willing to talk, because I think, this was such a big event in, the history of Indian entrepreneurship. And obviously everyone knew that. So, anyone who had played any role at Flipkart, was really, really eager to talk about it and talk about their experience at the company. So what actually surprised me was that, so many people were willing to talk and they were so forthcoming about, their experiences. And, obviously this kind of, I mean, one of the reasons that people open up also in cases like these is that if they already know that your stuff, and that you have spoken to so many people before you're speaking to them, then they're far more willing to talk, rather than talking to someone completely new, who's coming to them and asking very basic questions. So all of this kind of helped me, like, speak to as many people as possible in such a short span of time.
And how did you filter out kind of, I don't know how to say this lightly, but how did you filter out the BS? Because there's probably there's so many hidden agendas within the book. You already see that. How did you make sure that you kind of put out the emotion and just took the facts?
So that, I mean, there are various, steps in that process. So first is that, because again, I I already had such a wide network of people that I knew, it would be very difficult to, like, give bullshit, because, it's very easy to verify facts, right? Like, I mean, if you say that this has happened and I hear you out, but then 2 days later I check with someone else and they say, oh, no, this is all crap. And then I go back to the first person and say, boss, like, what is this? Obviously, I mean, they're not going to do it, because they know that you can easily verify details and facts with others. So that is the first step, that, because I was already coming into conversations with, I mean, not obviously a lot of knowledge, but with a fair idea of what I was talking about and what I was asking about. So many people didn't bother to, give as much bullshit as you would think normally, or as I expected. The second thing was when it comes down to the writing part. The writing part is when, you have to be very careful about, um, like, what you're including, because you have to separate facts from opinions, and you have to account for the biases of people who've given you certain information. So when you're writing, you have to tell yourself that, um, there are facts, B, there are opinions, C, there are very, very biased opinions. So I mean, and basically biased opinions in the sense that someone is deliberately trying to give you a distorted picture. So these are three different things. So the best way to address and to separate facts from everything else is that you, like, so at Mint, we used to follow this process where every important detail that you're writing about should be directly confirmed to you by two direct sources. Direct sources in the sense, by people who were directly involved in that event. So I followed that rule even with the book. So every single important detail in most cases has been directly verified and independently verified by two people separately. So that really helped, kind of uh, get as much accuracy as possible. And there were times, I mean, there were so many times, especially regarding the second half of the book, where, I had to constantly call my sources, and there were, like, I would say there were at least 5 to 10 points, important details, where I had to call my sources like more than 5 times on the same point, because it was just that, these events were happening. I mean, I was reporting on these events in 2018 and early 2019, but these events concerned matters that happened between 2014 and 18. So that's not really, so obviously memories can change, and people's interpretations and their own versions can become distorted. So I had to go back and double check these, not just double check, but check many, many more times, certain important details with several people.
And I'm interested because unfortunately you didn't get to interview the founders. So I kind of have two follow-up questions there. Why didn't the founders want to be part of the story? Because I feel like if I was the founder, I would kind of want to be a part of what the narrative is, especially because it's my baby. And two, did you ever get stuck at a point in the book where you're like, I just don't have the information I need, and only the founders would have that information? If that happened to you, how did you kind of get over that bit?
Yeah, I mean, that did happen several times. On your first question, why did the founders not participate? I mean, um, so I was not really expecting them to take part in this book, because both of them had extremely controversial exits from the company, and just given how sensitive these exits were, my expectation was that they would not participate in this book, and even if they do, they would not participate in any kind of meaningful way. And yeah, that totally came to pass. Like, they did not participate at all. So I think that was the main reason. And the other reason was also that I had been writing on Flipkart for 4.5 years, and I'd written many controversial stories, and they did not like those stories at all. I mean, many of those stories. So I didn't have a great relationship as such, with either of them. So again, so this was all known to me, right? So when I took up the book project, so I was not really expecting them to participate in the book. When On the occasions that I did get stuck, that typically, I mean, it was both, especially in the early parts of the book and in the towards the end of the book, because in the early parts of the book, like say the phase before 2010, especially, there were things that only like a certain very, very small number of people had access to. I mean, I'm talking about the information about that period, because for the first year, the two Flipkart founders were pretty much by themselves. I mean, they had one or two employees, but they were pretty much by themselves. And so obviously it was very difficult to get precise information about that period. But thankfully, again, I had access to at least two or three people who had known them and worked with them very closely in that time. So, and even say, even just that period before they started Flipkart, the 1 or 2 years before they started Flipkart. So I thankfully had access to two or three people who knew them in that time. So yeah, so that's how I was able to kind of get that information. But it was very tricky, and I mean, it was, yeah, it was very painful to get precise information about that period.
And as a journalist, going back to the first question I asked about the founders, how do you kind of manage that relationship between you have to put out this news article because it's the truth and it's your journalistic integrity and you have to do this, and maintain a positive relationship with the people that you're reporting on, because there's also a little bit of a give and take where you want to have a great relationship with them as well to get the information you need and also to potentially help them out. So how does that kind of dichotomy work?
So the thing is, you're right that you want, like, while you will do stories that need to be done, you still want a relationship with the founders, and you want a relationship with founders precisely because your stories will be more accurate, will be more well-rounded, will be more kind of comprehensive if you have access to the founders. So that is actually the main reason that you would want access to the founders. I think you have to accept that you will never have great relationships, and in fact, you should not even try to have great relationships with the people that you're writing on, because you don't want to get close to the people that you're writing about, because that will actually stop you from writing things in an objective way and in a critical enough manner. So you don't want a great relationship. What you want is that you want to be completely fair to them. You want to make sure that you present their perspective and their views. And those views and those perspectives are very clearly brought out in the story. So that is what you want. And that is what actually you should really strive to do. So at least that is how I approached it. So even when I was writing very controversial stories, I made sure that I was never um, unfair. I was never, I wouldn't say unfair, because obviously fairness is dependent on someone's point of view. But I would say that I certainly, made uh, every possible effort to reach out to them to ensure that they don't think that I'm writing because I have something against them personally, to make sure that they know that I'm writing it because that is my job. So yeah, so that is what you have to do. You have to try and be as fair as possible. You have to try and give them every possible chance to speak on things that you're writing about. That is what you can do, really.
Yeah, I imagine that's a very tough part of the job when you first become a journalist, because you don't want people to dislike you, but it's just a part of the job, and I guess that's something you have to get used to. So I want to get into another thing. You have gathered so much information through interviews, research, whatever you've done, and now how do you decide what goes in and what goes out?
Yeah, that's pretty tough, especially because with a story like this, you'll just have so much interesting material, and you would have obviously worked your ass off to get that material, that you would want to include everything. But I think, again, I had I mean, my editor at my publisher was really, really good, and especially on this aspect where she knew precisely um, uh, how to kind of direct me to like my own narrative, as in like if say I had sent her the first 6 to 12 chapters, she would read them and she would say, okay, these are the things that are not kind of fitting in to your narrative. So that is something that she did really well. And I think after that, after that first round of editing, I think after that it was pretty straightforward, because I knew, like, then the narrative was crystallized. It was very clear to me that, okay, this is actually what I'm going to focus on. So yeah, so that is how I approached it.
What is the relationship between the author and the publisher? How do they get involved in your writing process? Are they just an editor, or how does it work?
So uh, it actually just totally depends on uh, the book in question. So for instance, my book, like my editor, my publisher, it was a big bet for them financially. So they made sure that they devote their all of their resources, all of the possible resources that they have at their disposal to make the book a success. But most books actually are not very important to publishers, because especially the larger publishers end up doing hundreds of books a year. So it's only a small fraction of those books that get the kind of editing and marketing attention that is required. But thankfully, my book was one of those books where which had kind of gotten the both the editing and the marketing resources required. So it's not just editing, but it's also in terms of marketing the book that publishers help you with. And obviously, the sales side is completely taken care of by them. But I would say that um, it is largely up to you, both in terms of the writing aspect and the marketing aspect, to really push your book and to bring out the book in the best possible way.
Okay, and I just had this question come up in my mind. When you write a book, how much of the book do you kind of own? For example, if it's like a startup, is there a percentage of the book where the revenues come to you, or you paid a salary because they've invested in you to write the book? How does that work?
So it usually works in the royalty structure. So you get a certain percentage of the book sales, but um, for most books, publishers actually end up giving you an advance, because you obviously need that money to sustain yourself for the time that you're working for the book. And then once that amount, so once the book is out, that advance is set off against the royalties that would have come to you. And once the publisher recovers the advance, after that, you start getting royalties.
Got it. And now I want to get into the writing process, because this is probably the part that's toughest for all aspiring authors, writers, bloggers, whatever it is. And my first question is, because I've experienced this many times, you've written down a whole page and then you reread it and you're like, this is shit. Like, this is absolutely awful. And in the entire day, you just don't feel like you can put out anything good. What do you do in those kind of situations?
I think it's helpful to have daily word targets. At least I found that to be helpful. Um, like I said before, you will inevitably not end up meeting those targets, but it's useful to have those targets. And again, you're right. Like, most of the times when you reread something that you have written, you will feel like it's absolute crap. In fact, this happened to me till the last day of the book, till like the book actually went to press. So I was editing even till the last day, because it was just like, oh my god, this looks so bad, this looks so bad, that looks so bad. So it's just a never ending process. But I think at some point you have to realize that you have a book to finish. So yeah, you're not going to be able to write in the most perfect way that you want. So what you do is you put down stuff to the best of your ability, and then you just keep editing it again and again and again. So after I once I started writing the book, after the first 2 months, what I used to do is I used to devote. So I used to write for about anywhere between 4 to 8 hours every day, and I would devote a few hours every day to editing the previous day's work. And then every, like, say 2 3 weeks, I would devote like 2 days entirely to re-editing like stuff that I'd already edited. So this book, I would have I myself would have edited the book at least 10 to 15 times, between 10 and 15 times. Yeah, so it was just a very, very painful process. Um, but you have to do that if you care enough about, like how your writing comes out, then you just have to do it. There's just no getting around it.
But writing 8 hours a day sounds, I know you said four as well, but 8 hours a day sounds grueling, just sitting at a laptop and, putting words down. What are some things that you found worked for you while you're writing? Did you take breaks every 30 minutes? Did you exercise? Did you stand up and write? How do you do that much writing in a single day?
So I think first it's really, really important to find the right space to write. So I did not write um, in the room that I sleep in. I wrote in another room because I just found that if I write in that same room, I'm just going to lose my mind, because I don't want to be in that same damn place every single hour of the day. So I chose a place where, which seemed fresh in my mind, at least, which was well lit. So I found the right place. Secondly, yeah, certainly it helps a lot to take regular breaks. In fact, you have to do it, because it's too difficult to just sit and write. So I used to take a break every 45 minutes to an hour. And yeah, and then at the end, for the last 2 months, I used to go to this cafe as well, which was thankfully very deserted. So I used to write at home for 3-4 hours, and then I would go to the cafe for a couple of hours, and then come back and do my writing if I had to. But yeah, so it's a variety of these things. You just have to keep experimenting, really. Yeah, and another thing that I found to be particularly helpful was that you should, I mean, if you are a regular reader, you should not stop reading when you're writing. Like, reading when you're writing actually is very, very helpful. So I continued to read while I was writing. And if you're not a reader, then you should really try reading while you're writing.
That makes a lot of sense. I guess it can inspire you to write a certain way or write a certain thing in your book. And I want to ask, did you have any, I've heard other authors talk about this, but did you have any triggers? Like, I heard another author talk about when she starts putting her espresso machine on to make her coffee, and as soon as she took that first sip, it was like she was ready to write. Something in her mind clicked. Did you have any triggers like that, or was it just leaving your room and making sure you weren't there?
No, I didn't have any such triggers, because for me, because I was doing this full time, I was just completely into the book. So I mean, I'd be thinking about it even when I wasn't writing. So I'd start writing at, say, 10:30, 11 in the morning, and I'd end by 5 or 6 o'clock in the evening. um, I would be thinking about it even after that. So the last thing I would think of before sleeping is the book and about what I was writing. So you just have so many ideas, and you just want to do so many things that it just would come automatically, really.
Right. And just a small question here, but did you write 7 days a week or did you give yourself time off?
I did not write 7 days a week on uh, in all weeks, but yeah, there were some weeks when I wrote every day. But most weeks I would take at least one day off.
And looking back at this whole process, would you potentially have said you needed to take more time off, or when you're looking back, were you saying like, it may have been better if I worked more? How did you get your creative juices flowing?
So I think it would have. I mean, if I had to do it again, I would not. I mean, I would take a couple of months more. I would have, instead of working on the book full time from December of 2018, I would have worked on the book full time from August of 2018, um, because I just felt that I had to just do so much extra work in such a short span of time between December and August, that um, it was unnecessarily stressful, because while I was not writing, like say when I was writing, while I would take one day off on most weeks, I was still working on the book because I'd be doing reporting, I'd be doing research, I'd be doing something or the other. So pretty much from December to August, I did not take a single day off, and that was just extremely stressful. And I mean, like I don't know if I could have done a better job if I did not have that much stress and pressure. So I would certainly take a couple of months more, and I would have worked full time from August of 2018 to August of 2019.
Wow. Yeah, that sounds like an incredibly stressful period. And I want to ask this. This just came to my mind as well. Are you looking to write another book in the future? Did you enjoy the experience of writing a book?
Um, yeah, so I mean, I'm definitely going to write more books. I wouldn't say I really enjoyed the experience, but because, it is just so, like you said, it's just so grueling. But I just found it to be addictive. I mean, it's something that I felt that, I mean, this is what I want to do. So it's not just, I mean, because like I wouldn't call it enjoyment, because it's just such a demanding and stressful activity. But I just realized that, yeah, this is what I want to do in life. Yeah, so I definitely take up more book projects.
And I'm just interested as well. Like, I can only imagine once you've put in more than a year of work, you've dedicated everything to it. How did it feel when you held the first fully published book, of the Big Billion Startup? How did that feeling feel?
Yeah, so I mean, it felt great, obviously, but I had seen, so my publisher had, obviously they got the first copy, so they had sent me a picture of the books, of the first copies. And yeah, so I mean, when I saw the pictures, I was just like, wow, like, this is how it looks. Because I mean, while you see the obviously, you see the digital versions of your book covers and all that, the seeing it as a copy, just has a different kind of impact altogether. So yeah, so it was really kind of incredible to see it um, as a physical thing, because then that, oh shit, this is for real.
That's I bet like just going through all of that and then finally like yes, it's done must have been such an amazing feeling. And I want to ask you one thing about entrepreneurship before we go into a few quick fire questions. After everything that you've learned from doing so much reporting through your journalism as well as through this book, would you want to be an entrepreneur?
um no, because um I'm not really inclined to uh, pursue either a corporate job or uh, um, a business. But I think if I was, I mean, say for instance, if I was not a journalist, then I would certainly want to try my hand at entrepreneurship, because it just seems like such a captivating and demanding activity that it seems like, yeah, this is worth your while.
And I want to ask, is there any, it doesn't have to be one thing, or were there a few things that you took away from writing this book in terms of entrepreneurship that you learned from the experience, the good, the bad? What are a few things that you really took away from the Bansals from writing this book?
So to start with, you just can never tell uh, who is who is fit for entrepreneurship. That is something that you will only find out when you see someone do it or you do it yourself. uh, because there were so many people, in fact I would say an overwhelming majority of people, who thought that the Bansals would just never make it as entrepreneurs, because they were just considered such either weak or eccentric personalities, and just very mediocre people. So uh, And this is something that I've seen with so many other people. So I think in most cases you just do not know who is going to make a good entrepreneur versus who's not. So that is one thing. Another thing is that I think people change dramatically through the various stages of entrepreneurship, especially the people who are successful. So the way, say, especially a Sachin kind of grew into that whole um, persona of being an entrepreneur was really, really fascinating, because he was this very, very shy and um, kind of reserved person, which he of course continued to be till the end. But it was just very interesting to see how even such a shy and reserved person could take such bold, really ambitious, um, steps, and have such a kind of a really larger than life vision. So I think this is something that I notice as well, that people change a lot through the different stages of being an entrepreneur. And I think, especially in India, because especially this whole idea of internet entrepreneurship is so new. I think many entrepreneurs, like, it brings out the worst in them as people, because a entrepreneurship is anyway such a lonely thing. But in India, that is exacerbated by the fact that, at least till the last 2 years, there wasn't much of a support ecosystem around entrepreneurs. So, you know, the people who were successful in the last, say, in the period between 2007 and 2018, they were, I mean, yeah, they did it pretty much. They had to kind of put up with the pressures and the burdens of entrepreneurship pretty much by themselves. So it really tends to bring out the worst in many entrepreneurs as people.
That was the second point on Sachin was actually my biggest takeaway from the book. He's such a shy guy, but he had the most insane visions. He's kind of Steve
Yeah,
Jobs-esque in that way. He's like, we need to reach 1 billion in sales, and he always had huge numbers, which is it's really, and he really pushed for them. And that was
yeah,
kind of one of the big things I took away from the book.
absolutely. So a related point was that uh, what you said was absolutely the strength, was Sachin's strength, that he could, to use that cliched phrase, he could see the future. But one of the things that I learned is that, so a lot of entrepreneurs, to a lesser degree than Sachin, are able to see the future, and that is certainly a very important ingredient of being a successful entrepreneur. But I think, what was what really differentiated Sachin from a lot of other people was that, in the early years of Flipkart, not only was he able to see the future, but he was also able to see, in many cases, the specific things that would make that future happen. Whereas I think in the later years, he just was so kind of sure that the future would happen, that he lost track of those very, very small but crucial things that are required to make that future happen. So I would say that, yeah, like, having a vision and all that is very important, but you also need to know, like, what are those, like, important things that will make that future happen.
And I agree with you, and it felt like ego when I was reading the book towards the end. Like there were a few things where he wanted to think so far ahead, like when he wanted to go to an app-only e-commerce store. It felt like, yeah, you are predicting the future, but your ego is pushing you to keep going at it even after it's not been successful. So I guess also managing that ego and kind of realizing where your ego can take you astray may be another, that's something that I took away from the book.
You're right. So yeah, so the ego aspect is probably the biggest aspect of this, but I think it's also uh, an intellectual failure, because there is this thing that a lot of entrepreneurs in his place have, where they just they have this belief in technological determinism, which is that like no matter what, like the future is going to happen. So technology is going to take over the world, and in the retail business, in this example, yeah, like e-commerce is going to be the way of the future. But while that is true, it is not going to happen by itself. It is going to be driven by things that you do and things that your rivals do, which you just cannot predict, right? So what you need to understand is that, yeah, like the future is going to happen, but like you may not be part of that future. So it is only if you do the right things, if it's only if you do like a combination of right things, that you can make the future happen and be a big part of it.
I feel like we could do another whole hour about funding, entrepreneurship, all that kind of stuff, and hopefully we do in the future. But I want to go into a few quick fire questions. How often do you use social media?
um I use social media as little as possible. I mean, I have to use LinkedIn regularly because of work, but I don't use Facebook. I have a Facebook account, but I don't use Facebook. I have to use Twitter sometimes, but I try and avoid spending more than 5-10 minutes a week on Twitter. Unfortunately, to promote my book, I had to use social media frequently, but I try and avoid social media as much as possible.
Why is that?
I just find it a complete waste of time, because it's actually not even a waste of time. It's a very detrimental. It has a very detrimental impact on a, your attention span. B, I think it just gives you a very shallow and distorted picture of whatever it is that you're reading about. So earlier I used to think that these things are like these things are problematic, but what you gain from social media outweighs the kind of cons. But I don't agree. Like, I've totally changed my view on that, because I just don't find it useful to be on social media at all. Like, in for anything that you want to do, for anything that you're gaining from social media, there are far better ways to do those things.
Mihir, I'm so thankful that you came on the show. I really appreciate it.
Same here. It was great to be here.
It was awesome. And everybody, thank you so much for listening to this podcast. If you have any questions, make sure to put them in the comments section below. I'll forward them over to Mihir, and if he has the time, we'll get back to you on those. So thanks again for watching this podcast. See you guys in the next one.